Thank you for all coming along to this session. It's good to see you all. There's a lot going on, and so the fact that you've taken time to be here is appreciated. I think it's apocryphal, but the Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times, is true. It's really interesting at the moment for lots of reasons, but I think probably all of us follow what's going on in artificial intelligence, and that gets a lot of the headlines and a lot of the attention. But I believe what's happening in the physical world and the fact that there's this convergence between AI and the Internet of Things is every bit as important as whatever the new model is that comes from one of the frontier labs that are out there. And to me, AI is a bit like one of these scenes in a Marvel movie where there's this monster behind the glass, and we've given it a keyboard and it can see what's going on in the world, and we know that it's very powerful. But what we're in the process of doing is opening the doors and letting AI out into the physical world and going from a world where it's getting millions and millions of data points to potentially trillions as you connect AI with food, with medicine, with clothing, with parts. And I think the disruptive potential for good is huge. There's also some risks, mainly around data ownership and who controls the data that allows us to harness AI. But that's another presentation for another day. One of the things that I think it's really important to give some thought to is the problem that IoT and ambient IoT solves. And I'll get into how we define it later. I'll talk about the Alliance, I'll talk about the radio standards, and I'll probably spend hopefully about half of this presentation talking about use cases where ambient IoT is being deployed today at the scale of millions of tens and hundreds of millions of sensors. But to take a step back, we're acclimatized to this world where supply chains which govern the cost of goods, the availability of goods, are really being run in a very crude manner. They're essentially, metaphorically, being run with the lights turned off. We only see where products are at any one time for glimpses. Someone scans a QR code, or if we're lucky, products are taken through an RFID gate at an entrance or an exit. And it seems very basic, maybe not even very interesting, but the fact that we don't really know where stuff is has a huge impact on the cost of goods, on environmental impact. And there's a massive potential to improve these things. I've spent roughly the last 10 years talking to companies that are interested in this area, some of the biggest companies in the world, who are all trying to solve problems that relate to just trying to figure out where all of their stuff is. And when we solve that, then we have a huge opportunity to improve the world that we live in. So ambient IoT, of course, is an evolution of the Internet of Things, which is a phrase that was coined in 1999 by a product manager at Procter & Gamble. He was talking about connecting cosmetics and consumer packaged goods products, and he then became a luminary in the IoT world, and there was a vision that our fridges, our washing machines, there would be IoT readers everywhere. And that's largely a failed vision. That's harsh because there's probably 50 billion RFID tags sold every year, so that's not nothing. But 50 billion versus maybe 5 trillion products that could be tagged is really just a drop in the bucket. And part of the problem that IoT, the original vision, has not been delivered is down to cost. And this idea of taking IoT and combining it with the concept of ambience, of using compute which is everywhere, is something that at my old company, Wiliot, we got very excited about when we were able to produce a tag for roughly 10 to 20 cents, which is like an Apple AirTag that normally costs $20 to $30. And I got the opportunity to work at that company. I was the first employee outside of the core R&D team. And did a bit of everything. And one of the things we tried to do was to get the world to realize that there's a huge potential. And fortunately, Christopher Mims of the Wall Street Journal wrote an article about it, and that helped us get people thinking about an ambient Internet of Things, which is really where we go from a paradigm where, yes, you have auto-identification, you have readers that can scan 1,000 tags in a second, but you go from a world which back in the turn of the millennium, back in the year 2000, this conference didn't exist. You wouldn't have been coming here back then because embedded electronics was really nowhere close to where it is today, and the number of radios was very sparse. Now, if you look at the radios, if you could shut your eyes and see radio waves, you'd see this spectrum. It would be like a rainbow in your office, in your home. There are radios everywhere. So the original RFID was built with specialist radios that still cost thousands of dollars. A handheld reader, which is the thing that you see if you go to a supermarket, that probably costs $1,000. That radio costs tens of dollars. But we have radios in our washing machines. We have radios in these phones that we carry around. And the potential with ambient IoT is to use those radios to start to connect to the things that surround us. And so you go from a reader that costs $1,000 that requires someone to manually point it and pull a trigger to just using the Bluetooth, the Wi-Fi, and the cellular radios that are everywhere, that are embedded in so many things we can't even count, so that the infrastructure becomes a lot cheaper. And it's everywhere. So rather than turning that flashlight on and seeing the inventory and the objects in a few places, you're actually seeing it continuously. So you go from a dot to a line. What is ambient IoT? This is the definition that the Ambient IoT Alliance agreed on, which is it refers to a class of IoT devices primarily powered by harvesting the energy that surrounds us, which in its best case is RF energy, but it could be light, it could be heat, it could be kinetic energy. And we're using that rather than batteries, because batteries, they add to the cost. The real cost of batteries is around the logistics of replacing them and the fact that they don't always perform at certain temperatures. So if you can figure out how to get your energy from radio waves, then you suddenly have a package that got a lot cheaper, that doesn't have anything toxic in it, that's a lot smaller, where you don't need line of sight. And so this definition is something that everyone in the Alliance could agree on. But in my mind, it's really just all about cost. If you can take the cost of readers to almost zero, and you can take the cost of a tag from $30 or $300 down to 3 cents or 5 cents. And because they're everywhere, you don't need a person. You don't need to pay a person to do a job to scan something. It's just being read. Then that removal of cost gets you to a world where you can have an omniscient view. You can see everything everywhere all at once, to quote the title of an Oscar-winning film. And then if you combine that visibility of food, medicine, clothing parts with AI, then you've got something that is profoundly disruptive in a way that we're really only just starting to see. Now, the concept of combining AI with the physical world is something that is really starting to get attention, and maybe one of the richest men in the world, CEO of NVIDIA, Jensen Huang, has talked about physical AI, and he presented this chart a year ago at the NVIDIA user conference, and he talked about a progression of generative AI to agentic AI, which is basically generative AI but with tools, to physical AI. And generally it's the robots and the cars that get most of the limelight, but I really believe that it's the everyday things that we're consuming every day that we depend on that are actually as important as the robots and the cars. Especially at conferences like this, we tend to focus on the lower levels of an ambient IoT stack. And when you start thinking in ambient terms, it does change everything. You go to designing circuits that have nanowatts of leakage in them. You have to redesign the way you start to compute things. It's really not just a question of improving the performance of the circuits. You change fundamentally their architecture. But there's also changes all the way up the stack. And this afternoon I'm going to be talking about in more detail about the changes to the radio standards. But imagine a billing system that rather than tracking SIMs and phones, of which there may be millions and millions, to a billing system that has to look at trillions of things. And that's a fundamental redesign of the back-end systems. And the applications also need to be redesigned. So I'm actually very frustrated that we're not further along with ambience. But one of the things is that there really aren't ambient applications yet. The amount of data is huge. The algorithms, the use cases are all evolving so rapidly and they're so new. And then this also drives changes in processes, or often very positive ones where human beings are doing a lot less and they're running out of things less often and processes are running more efficiently. And ultimately it bubbles up to lower costs of goods, much lower amounts of capital tied up. There was one customer that we were working with that made car batteries, and they calculated that they could cut the number of distribution vehicles in half, cut the size of the distribution vehicles in half, and cut the amount of inventory of batteries that they sold to a third of what it was if they could see everything everywhere all at once. So this is not a 10% improvement, it's 100 or 200% improvement in economics. But it takes a lot, and the infrastructure is not all there, and we're in a progression, which is what makes it fun and interesting. Why have an Ambient IoT Alliance, and what have they been doing, and why haven't they been doing more? The companies that formed this alliance are the ones that you see up there, and it's been a kind of a slow process. A lot of the folks involved have been the people that are working in standards groups in IEEE, 3GPP, and BLE. And so all of those move at a fairly glacial pace. And as an organization, we've been working on some white papers that are about to come out. And even though the alliance was announced over a year ago, it's taken this long to get to a point where we can incorporate. So my hope is that fairly soon it'll be open for business and that anyone that wants to join can join. And that will allow us to work not just on the radio standards, but on that full stack of applications and processes, technologies and collaborations that will be required to really make the most of this new level of visibility that can change things. Okay, so that's hopefully set the scene. You get a sense of why I'm personally very excited by Ambient IoT and why it's different. What does it actually look like in action? We're just starting to see this, and so what I've done is I've got some content that shows a few of the use cases that have been implemented. And one of the first ones, it was in logistics, parcel carrying. The mail carrier in the UK, Royal Mail, has deployed Ambient IoT tags on their rolling cages. So it's not the most glamorous application, but rolling cages are actually really fundamental to whether you get your letter or parcel delivered on time. And when they started this process, they knew that they had a visibility issue. They had roughly 750,000 rolling cages, and the rolling cages are used to move parcels around. If you don't have rolling cages at the right place at the right time, say at the shipping dock at Harrods, then someone's not going to get their Christmas pudding on time because you've got parcels that need to be delivered, rolling cages aren't there, and basically that's a problem. It turns out that they actually had not 750,000, but they had 950,000 rolling cages. They put the readers in the vans that they use, actually huge trucks to deliver, and the project paid for itself literally within the first month because they didn't need to buy more of these rolling cages And they now have this incredible situation room where they can see where these things that are like the white blood cells that move the oxygen around the network, they can see where they are. So it's a profound improvement. Another area that is an interesting application is related. It's the logistics around retail and grocery supply chains. One of the biggest retailers in the world, Walmart, is using RFID quite famously. Arguably, they helped to bootstrap the whole of the RFID industry, but they're also using ambient IoT. And they use RFID at the item level with handheld readers, and they use ambient IoT for crates and maybe other things. But the pallets that they use to move these stacks of goods, the fact that they don't need an associate to scan them is a fundamental improvement for their supply chain. And the thing that really opened their eyes to the possibilities of ambient IoT came down to a story. Stories are one of the things that allows us to function as a species. And this story was about strawberries and the fact that when they started putting tags on their strawberries, they realized that they were freezing some of them unintentionally. Strawberries aren't good after you've frozen them. And they weren't just freezing them once, but they were freezing them half a dozen times. And that story opened their eyes to, oh, we're a very well-run company, but even for us, there are things that we're not seeing for the items that are being shipped out to the stores. So what we're seeing amongst a number of customers is starting to put these readers inside shipping containers to track what's going into the shipping containers. And so there's another really large retailer that's an online retailer. If you buy an exercise bike or a sofa or a television set online in the States, the chances are it will have an ambient IoT sticker on it. And the use case there is just making sure that this product doesn't get put into the wrong vehicle. Now, it doesn't happen very often because this company's really good. They have amazing technology. But it happens occasionally. And if you put a sofa on the wrong truck and it goes to the wrong city, people who ordered it, who've stayed at home to receive it, get really upset. And then the sofa has to travel further than you'd planned, and the chances of it getting damaged increase. And so just the ability to detect without someone having to manually scan if something's been put in the wrong place, it turns out, is incredibly useful. Another application is in the pharmaceutical area. Now, ambient IoT tags, when they don't have batteries, they have the ability to withstand incredibly low temperatures. And you can make them very small, and you can actually cryogenically freeze them, and when you defrost them, they still work. So we all went through this horrendous COVID thing, and one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies knew that their vaccines didn't work if they were kept at room temperature. And so we embarked on a project to work with them to integrate tags into their vaccine vials. And we were able to show that you could track the vaccine vial at an item level and show if it had been left by some clinician on a table for too long and therefore would do no good. It wouldn't protect the person that was inoculated. Now, unfortunately, this is an example of a project that was never deployed because there was no regulatory driver to do that. So millions of people have been vaccinated with vaccines that did them absolutely no good at all. But we do have the technology, and I'm hopeful that in the future, insulin auto-injectors and vaccine vials will all get the visibility that they deserve, and more people will be given the protection that they need. So there are so many use cases. I've enjoyed the last few years talking to people across lots and lots of industries, but the thing that gets me most excited is this. It's this ability to start to join up every stage of production, distribution, sale, usage in home, and then either recycling or reuse. And here in Europe, I think it's a wonderful thing that there's the digital product passport legislation and standards being put in place. And there's actually an impetus to collect the data that will allow us to inform consumers where products came from, how they've been treated, and to give all of us more agency, more power to vote with our checkbooks, our purses and our wallets, what we buy, where we spend our money, and how we start to influence this economy that's supposed to be working for us. So data is power. Ambient IoT unlocks that data and it puts it in the hands of everyone across the supply chain. So it's also a huge opportunity for the companies at this conference to start getting to know the standards and being part of this network. That's it from me. I hope this has been helpful.